Perfect. Hi, this is Child Development 107, modules 10 and 11 this week. Because our class didn't go the full semester, we took pushed it back a little bit so we could put it all together. We have to double up a little bit towards the end, but since we're talking about middle childhood, it's talking about a little bit of an older child. This is where I see you guys start to connect physically, like in your mind, like, oh, middle childhood. I was like 9, 10, 11, 12. And I remember that a little bit. So the fact that we're doubling up a little bit right now is kind of okay. And there is that natural overlap between the physical development and the cognitive development, right? Because our brain, which is cognitive development, which is 11, it grows as part of our physical body. And we're talking about our physical body in module 10. So to me, there's a little bit of overlap, and I think it's easy to put it together. However, there's a lot. There's a lot. So middle childhood, remember, again, we get a little bit older. This is like right up to adolescence. So to me, this is when it's not infant toddler, when they're like little babies, like toddling like infants and then starting to walk, and then preschoolers and asking you why and noticing the world and getting their brain online. This is like, and this is after preschool, right? Where preschool is when they're, learning about friends and routines and just starting to learn about school and writing and hanging up a back, right? All those things. Now, these are like the upper grades in elementary school, right? So 4, 5, 6-ish, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6. And this is where you get kids who you start to see them click into themselves. You start to see the love of like soccer. They became a soccer player, athlete, or they're like they're really good at academics, or they're like very nurturing. You could see them, like, I remember being 10 years old and I could tell who was going to be a teacher, right? So like, oh, bing, 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 who was going to be a mom, bing, 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 who was going to be like in high school, a jock, bing, 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 like, who's going to be in like leadership, bing, bing, like you could see it, right? I also still have what I call cartoon vision. So I can see a 10-year-old in front of me, and then I can, like, my eyes like change like a cartoon, like I can see their senior picture, right? And I don't see the braces and I don't see the pimples, but I see like a more mature version in that little, those senior pictures and stuff. And so I really like this middle childhood stuff. We can have a conversation with these kids. Their brain is getting closer to adulthood. It's not adolescence. To me, this is almost like the calm before the storm. Man, I'm not saying that puberty's, the worst. I'm just saying that this is like the stealthy puberty. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So you'll get a lot more coordination. You get a lot more planning. You get a lot more, a very intentional person, a person who likes this music, a person who likes this t-shirt, a person who likes this, they're starting to become like this, like not a mini adult, but like a mini adult, right? That's right. So we'll talk about physical growth, nutrition, obesity and weight gain, pros and cons of sports, developmental disorders, mental health disorders. And so you do see some of these things show up. I mean, there are kids as young as 10 years old having conflicting feelings so hard that they have clinical depression or anxiety. We're seeing those on the rise. And so this is a very, very important chapter. And I like, again, how you guys will start to be like, oh, I remember my 4th grade teacher or my 5th grade teacher, or transitioning to middle school in 6th grade, or things like that. And so there's skills that you've learned even at this age that you are still using today, right? It's really interesting because our academics start to get a little bit more focused, sophisticated, challenging. And so you really start to become, again, this version of your adult self starts in middle school, starts in middle childhood. Yeah. So again, here's the links to the books, the PowerPoint presentations from the author. And I'm hoping that you guys do watch those videos because they are good, but there's always more to do. That's why I separate everything out by sections. I do love Khan Academy, and they do talk about the brain changes in adolescence. This I repeat in the next unit only because this talks about early adolescence and later adolescence, which is good. The adolescent brain. Now, again, adolescence is in the next unit, but this talks about the pre-adolescent, right? And so we'll learn in the next unit about how adolescence, like teenagerness, is the toddlerhood of adulthood, right? If toddlerhood is like the getting prepared for preschool and whatnot, teenagerness, adolescence is getting prepared for adulthood, right? But even before teenagerness, we have this pre. So you're going to see some of these videos double, but the information kind of overlaps, but I don't want to skip it and say, oh, learn it next unit. I think it's better to have exposure to it twice than once. So again, this one here, same thing. These came from the author. I couldn't find any other pieces on physical development that was better than what the author provided. So I just wanted to make sure that that was there. Nutritional needs. I right now have a 15-year-old who is an adolescent, but he was super tiny until last year. He was under 100 pounds. So he finally cracked 100 pounds within this year. So at 13, 14, he actually cracked 100 pounds. So he was always under eating, always. Now he's like a little bit overdoing it. But again, here's all these different sites, this healthy eating calculator, like the calories that a child needs who's super active is very high. Sometimes they need more calories than a full grown adult. But again, as our body changes, those needs change as well. So we'll talk more about childhood obesity. A lot of it has to do with how the food's processed and how our soil is not the same and how we are addicted to, devices and we don't get out as much. So again, here's exercise, physical fitness, and sports. My son now goes to a private school. And so in middle school, when he was in, maybe let's say he was in 5th grade, 6th grade, they had PE every day. Now they had to add it to his school because they didn't have it, but now it's kind of fun. He's like, oh, we're learning how to dance, or we're learning dodgeball. There's nothing better than a bunch of children with autism dancing. They just had their dance last week. And so it was just awkward and fun, just the best. And it was a Marvel theme. So he dressed up as like the king of Wakanda. And so he had a full dashiki on, and they got to dance and had a good time. So, but dancing is very, very healthy. And so I'm glad that the kids are learning dances. So here for physical health, we'll talk more about this. And I put this video in here from Dr. Heather LaChance, and she talks about stress and trauma in kids. This is really, really important because besides the infographics that I added, just the concept of stress and trauma in kids is huge now. I mean, could you imagine? I know we all went through the pandemic, but we were older, right? You guys are like, we're teenagers or older. I was a grown adult. Could you imagine being 10 years old going through a pandemic? Just breaks my heart. And so, you know what? The greater good that we talked about, the greater good here from UC Berkeley is not horrible. Check that out. There's a happiness calendar I mentioned earlier, but I'm recording it. Guided meditations from UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. It's a free download of an app. It comes in all these different languages, including ASL. Fantastic. And I shared a walking challenge that I participate in called the Conqueror Virtual Challenges. And you can earn these medals if you walk, let's say Hadrian's Wall is like 100 miles. If you virtually log 100 miles, you get this medal. It does cost money to join in these things, but for me, it helps me keep going. And I think it's really cool. And lastly, things like this, Atlas of the Heart, books. And we have a class here at SCC. We are one of the first community colleges in the nation to propose this class and a certificate in trauma and resilience for children and educators. I mean, there's graduate level courses, there's master level courses, but we're one of the first people in the nation to propose this and get it going. So yeah, it's really exciting, really exciting. Always ask me if you have any questions on trauma and resilience, and I always suggest to take 220. It's called 220 now, but in the fall it'll be called 222, trauma and resilience. So always asking more. In fact, I will put it in the chat right now. because it is super, I already put it in there earlier, but just in case I missed anybody, trauma and resilience class. It's amazing. It's amazing. So, okay, next we have so much going on. Yay. Let's see. Oh, childhood mental health. Again, this kind of piggybacks on trauma and resilience. When kids are stressed and they have no one to talk to, it makes things worse. But now we're getting people who are more open and aware. TikTok has been very interesting. That there's a lot of vulnerable sharing of mental illness and symptoms. And then we have, like, on YouTube, you have a how to ADHD. You know, there's like an expert now, this young woman who now does a TED Talk on what it's like to have ADHD. And so that's huge. So there's a lot more outlets now, and I'm very, very happy to see that. But when in doubt, talk it out. All right. So National Institute of Mental Health added here, data and statistics on children's mental health. We got, even besides kids, we got an alarming statistic December of last year that said over 50% of college students have clinical depression. Over 50%. Oh, another reason why we're trying to evolve our campus into a more health-centered approach for trauma and resilience focused education, right? So again, here's the National Institute of Mental Health. Again, I put here is ADHD and autism are not mental health disorders. People do kind of lump them in together, but it's just information. They're considered developmental disorders, and ADHD is considered a processing disorder. So if you have ADHD, you don't have mental illness, right? A lot of people still have that stigma around that. And so we're working really hard to bust that stigma. Okay. Here is what is ADHD and and here's this gal I was talking about how to ADHD. She's adorable, and she has a TED Talk too on there as well. Statistics from the CDC, and then what is autism? We used to think a long time ago autism was a mental health disorder. It's a processing error where parts of the brain just work differently, and they just see the world differently and process the world differently. So if you have an interest in learning more about that, come take 205 with me. But in the meantime, you're going to watch these videos, which are fantastic. Good. And then managing symptoms. This is for all of us too, staying healthy, right? And I told you, shared with you Atlas of the Heart. She even says, like in the last part, she goes, how do I manage myself? She goes, I gave up caffeine, I drink a lot of water, I exercise every day, and I just have to not be around certain people and then choose other things like meditation, right? So a lot of different things going on here. So again, these chapters are very robust in a good way, because think about it, this is how kids like create that trajectory for their life, right? So again, notes outline, you guys are rock stars. I need to update that to 10 points, not 5. Could you imagine if notes were only 5 points? No, they were last semester, and I updated them because that's a lot of work. I wanted to give you guys the points. Theory to practice, which is like the discussion board. And here, this is where I want you to connect to you. During your middle childhood, ages 6 to 12, how much did you grow? I remember by the age of 12, I kind of got taller and thinned out. And I had other parents like commenting like, oh, Marianne, you're going through growth spurt. Like I wasn't so like round. I got a little bit taller. And then for sports and physical activity, I used to have I was in Pop Warner cheerleading, but that was because my mom wanted me in Pop Warner cheerleading. But my teacher in the 5th grade, he would run jazzercise classes. No kidding. Like, yeah, seriously, we would do jazzercise because it was the 80s. And so my stress levels were really high, and coping it was interesting because when you're a kid, you don't really think that you need to cope. But for me, I realized I read a lot of books, but I also was very crafty. I was in Girl Scouts and never very physical, but I did like to dance and things like that. So, and it's the same thing still works for me now. Like I like to move my body. I do a lot more music, things like that. And then any other event that may have affected your development, like, you know, your parents got divorced or you moved from one country to another, or like something. Sometimes your development is so, like my son, he's on different medications that changed his body a lot. So it's these things like if we could do without the medications, we would, but we can't. So there's these pieces like there. So post what you're comfortable with. You don't have to like put your whole life story on there, but like I do see people already posting, so I don't want to put too much in there. And so after the discussion board is reflection. You guys are doing really well on that. Make sure you separate it by 3 paragraphs so I know that you're getting it all in. Always add the hyperlink in there. So you say, I found this TED talk on mental this or childhood this, give me the link, because I don't get to see everything that's out there. I don't always have the time. You guys are the foot soldiers for additional information. So it's just really, really cool. So, and then there's the quiz, and then I'm going to jump right to module 11. Does that make sense? So do you guys agree that you're kind of remembering this age a little bit better? Who remembers this age a little bit better?
Yes, we remember it.
Yeah, it's like, I think we all remember the painfulness of adolescence and awkwardness and the hormones and puberty, and that's like next unit. But this one, it was to me like, again, like before that adolescent stuff started. So it's like, it was a good time. It was a good time. Like people were starting to just become a version of themselves. It was really nice to see. And I like seeing kids, like I like seeing 8, 9, 10-year-olds, right? I just read an article today that there's a 13-year-old who just graduated Fullerton College, 13-year-old with 4 degrees. And I'm thinking, so what were they doing at 10? And, you know, great. He's super smart and gifted. That's great. But did he have a life? You know, was he having a good time? So it's hard. I think it's very important for children to be children and play. Yeah. Oh, and I'm missing my graphic here. Needs, graphic, and goals. I love it. This is where sometimes I don't finish my to-do list, which is fine. So chapter 11, this is all the to-do list, and so I'll get that part updated. Let me give myself a note. Chapter 11, update, goals. That's it. All right, cool. I can get that in there. Yeah, I make my own graphics, so it just, if I forget, there's no one else to do it. It's me. Let's see what we got in here going. All right, so our reading again for this OER book. So we're chapter 11. We're talking now about the cognitive development of middle childhood, which now we talked about how our bodies are. Now we're talking about, okay, how were you learning and thinking and growing? Yes. So this is the part of the cognitive theories of intelligence. And studying children and how they think has not always been a popular science for scientists and researchers. So always when we talk about cognitive development, we're talking about Piaget, and he has his 4 stages. And this, again, this video I've shown multiple times, but it's because infant, toddler, the early childhood, middle childhood, we're right here. And then we get into adolescence. But in this section, we are more logical. This is when we get more, we talk about here, remember we talk about sensory motor. We learn by touching and putting things in our mouth. Here we are pre-operational, meaning we are pre-logic. We're a little bit silly in our logic. Here we're logical. Now you're going to get kids who get into this very rule-based life, right? So think about it. At 10 years old, you were doing math. Maybe we're doing intro to algebra, or maybe doing long division, big multiplication. So now in science, and now look at this guy, he's trying to prove things and make things work. You're going to hear kids start following rules. They're going to memorize rules more. You learned about spelling words for the week. You really started having these like cognitive, little bit more rigid, more goal-oriented pieces in this time of your education. You'll also get kids who start to like pick out when somebody else is breaking the rules. You get a lot of tattletaling. You'll get it like if like I said, I remember saying to my nephew one time, oh, that's a stupendous job, and he was all like, you said stupid, like I broke the rules. So they'll get a little bit from that silly spot into a more rigid spot. This is kind of cute, and that just shows you that their brain is working. It can be a little irritating, but their brain is working, and that's great. That's a good sign, right? So again, we went from sensory motor to pre-operational, now concrete operational. And the way to remember this is that pre-operation is like younger, but concrete operational is like the blacktop at elementary school. If you had that outside area where you could do handball and foursquare and tetherball and hopscotch and all that stuff, that's blacktop. So concrete operational, right? And then later we'll talk about formal operations, which is like, he kind of has like a bow tie. Think of it like the prom. So high school is like the prom, formal operations. The one before that is concrete operations. And seriation is another way. It's the way that we're talking, putting things in order. It's like first this happened, then that happened, then this. I remember my son was working on a World War I essay, and it was like, I think it was like, was it Russia invaded Poland, and then the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and then World War I started, and he could not put the first this, then that, then this happened. And that's just part of his limitations. That's how his brain is. But this is usually when we learn that about, kids learn that. They learn about the dinosaurs. First, the earth developed like this, then there was dinosaurs, and then there was the great extinction, right? So it's like 1, 2, like the very logical or seriation, what happened first, what happened second, what happens third. This declassification, again, when we do these experiments with little kids, they don't quite get it, but older kids are like, ugh, so easy, I got it. And this older girl, she's like logical to the point. It's so great. Even this kid answers you can tell like this mom is like a student or a teacher, and he answers, he's like rolling his eyes before she even gets the question out of her mouth. It's hilarious. Again, more concrete operations. And I do like putting here, our book talks about Robert Sternberg. He's one of the only theorists in our book that is still alive today. And so it's kind of interesting. And triarchic intelligence is fantastic. It talks about our different parts of our intelligence. We have our smarts, we have our emotional intelligence, and we have this like environmental piece where we're putting it all together. So I always like putting people in there who are, yeah. And this guy, there's a person, I forget who is it. Oh yeah, it's Elkind, proving Piaget's cognitive development. So Elkind, I'm not sure if he's still alive, but this is a little bit more of a contemporary, like in the 80s type situation. So anything that's closer to contemporary, I like to share. So let's see. Yeah, gardeners. Oh, I love gardeners. I have to tell you, I'm a walking, talking like proponent of Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. And it just means that there's things that you're naturally good at. Like I didn't realize music is such a big part of me, and the outdoors is such a big part of me, that I'm the person who can be driving down the road and I can kind of be like naming the trees, the plants, and the bushes. Like it just, and I don't know where I learned this stuff. It just is a kind of a part of me. I'm not a fantastic musician. I just appreciate music very, very much. That, when I'm listening to meditations, I sleep with like native flutes or like whale sounds. Like sound is very, very important to me. And so you'll see how people are naturally good at physical parts of their body. They're like the athletes or dancers, choreographers, or people who are really naturally gifted at 3D spatial relationships or math or people or themselves. And so I'm a big fan of Howard Gardner's. It doesn't mean that you are stuck there. It just means that if I'm really good at nature and people, I might not be as good at math. But if I'm really good at math, there's a high chance I might be good at music, because math and music are very, very, yeah. And then if you're good with people, you may be high linguistically, because to connect with people, it's usually using shared language. If you're good at kinesthetic or you're good at body awareness, you also might be a natural architect, because an architecture of the body could be similar to architecture of a building, a park, anything like that. So I really, really do appreciate Gardner's. Good stuff there. Information processing. This is one of the newer ways of talking about how the brain works. And I think it's fantastic, because if we talk about the brain like a computer, it's not far-fetched, because our brain is like a computer. But let's rephrase that. A computer is like our brain. Our brain is always faster. Always. Computers are not sentient yet. Until that time happens, we win. Okay. In my lifetime, I don't think the computers are going to take over. Maybe later, but now we are smarter. We are faster. Just because you can't use a computer as fast as a computer can be used doesn't mean that the computer's smarter than you. It's not. So there's different parts of our memory, working memory. Oh, bummer. This one is info processing video. I gotta fix that. You know, and if the owner of a video wants to make it private, I completely understand. And people can delete stuff from YouTube. We're just borrowing it for educational purposes. So memory challenges, this is huge. You could have a brain disorder. You could have like an accident, car accident. You could have there's children who have had strokes. So working memory is important, right? A lot of times people with ADHD struggle with that. And then Peter did how your working memory works for you. That's good stuff. Okay, let's see. Again, cognitive processes. I like how we can talk now about metacognition. It's a concept that I learned at graduate school, and then lo and behold, my son's first grade teacher was talking to them about it. It's metacognition is saying, this is how I think, thinking about how I think, or expressing how I think, or you, or how we, right? So that's meta. Meta is like taking the bigger picture view of it. So if anybody says, oh, that's so meta, they're meaning like you're talking about something that we normally talk about in a little smaller of a environment, but we're actually taking a step back to view what we do, how we talk about it, what it's all about. And so meta can be used for anything as long as you're taking that larger perspective. So we could talk about our talking, we could think about our talking, we could feel about our talking. Same thing, we can feel about our feelings, right? We can think about our thinking. That's the process. Or if you've had a conversation with a friend or family member that said, hey, do you know every time I bring up the conversation about the laundry, you cut me off and talk about something else? That's a metacognitive, a meta communication statement. Yeah. So please learn about this because it's super important. And again, that teacher that taught Peyton is still teaching first graders metacognition. She literally would stop her class and go meta, and they would go cognition and stop talking. Love her. Right. Critical thinking. This is huge. Critical thinking. I put that in there because I can tell you as a professor, critical thinking has diminished greatly over the last couple of years. And I'm currently blaming the pandemic, but I think there's this piece where our society is very instant gratification and just does things for you. And it doesn't really, do you follow what I'm saying? So this critical thinking where to think through a problem, that skill is lost right now. And I think high schools were good at that, but we got to get back to it because a lot of times I give very detailed instructions and a lot of people are, well, what do you mean? Like, can you just tell me how to do it fast? I'm like, yes and no. Like, you have to really think about it. You have to critically evaluate how you have to look at these different pieces of a puzzle and discuss them. And that is a skill to be built. It's not easy. But when you can talk and when you can express yourself and when you can critically evaluate something, you got the keys to the kingdom. That's what college is for, is to be able to critically evaluate, see what these different ideas are, these new things that you've never seen before, and say, hey, this is good, this works for me, or this is not good, doesn't work for me, but let's talk about it more. You know, it exists for other people, right? It's just this critical conversation about that's good, that's not so good, that works, that doesn't work, how does it work, why does it work, and how to compare and contrast. Those are higher order thinking that we've kind of lost along the way. And it's not because we're not smart. It's just because we've gotten used to things just handed to us, you know, social media and whatnot. You know, let's say I wanted to, I ordered my son a dashiki for his dance. And so I was like, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I wouldn't even know where to get a dashiki. Now I go Amazon, click, click, clack, done. And it's at my house in 2 days. Right. So did I have to critically find a dashiki maker? Like, it was just unbelievable. We just have a lot of things just given to us. And so it's our intelligence dipping. Yeah. I like TED Ed here. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but TED Ed is that offshoot of, TED Talks. They're shorter videos. And this was an idea from a person with autism. In fact, it was one of their TED speakers who was like, people with autism could take shorter amount of information and you could just make TED just for education. And boom. Yeah. So the dark history of IQ tests. My son is of mixed heritage in the state of California. You cannot give an IQ test in the educational system to a child who has African-American genetics or heritage. So, and that has to do with the 1979 court ruling. Not necessarily believe that it still holds up, but I was able to get an IQ test in a different way, in a couple of different ways. So interesting, very, very interesting. And here's the whisk, and this is how he, oh, and by the way, I literally put in there, can you find the question that the narrator got wrong? What? And here's where IQ scores are, right? And this tells you right here, the average IQ is 100. If you're between 85 and 115, that's where 68% of any population of the world exists. Most people have an average IQ, an average, a high average, or low average. It's fine. Yeah, and that's okay. Anything below an 85 is going to be, we call intellectually disabled. We don't say mental retarded anymore. We say intellectually disabled, and then we go mild, moderate, profound, or severe. And then up here, we're going to have gifted, right? So some of these IQs correlate with like college attainment and whatnot. But 140 is low genius. Yeah, 145, 150 is genius. And then we would have Sir Stephen Hawking's at 170, Einstein at 160, Gina Davis at 150. Yeah, people. Yeah. I have a friend who's got a kid up here too. He has autism, and he's smart as a whip. And it only takes about 110 to be the president. That's the average. Yeah, I'm not kidding. For all the presidents. Yeah. Some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower. And neurodiversity is a nice way of saying like unique needs or special needs. We liked here at the college, we're changing everything from special needs to special populations. Intellectual disability, again, is what we talked about. And this is from the Special Olympics. I used to have an aunt with Down syndrome who was in the Special Olympics. It's a very awesome program. Very, very cool. And what does it mean to be gifted? Now, kids who are gifted qualify in the state of California for special education as well. Because if you don't support the kids who are gifted, trust me, how do we grow as a society if smart people aren't getting supported, right? Standardized testing. Yeah, not a big fan, but it works for some reasons. And Every Student Succeeds Act. We used to call this a No Child Left Behind Act, and now it's called the ESSA. So again, if you want to learn more about this is fantastic. She has autism, and so it looks totally different in women. It's fantastic. But the bonus is just the bonus. But if you want to learn more about neurodiversity and intellectual disabilities, or you want to learn more about giftedness or autism or ADHD, anything like seizure disorder, or the deaf community, or people with low vision and blindness, that's my 205 class. We're changing that number in the fall to 202, but just look for intro to special populations. Yeah, love that. That's my jam. Again, discussion board. I'm looks like I skipped notes. Maybe I put them in the wrong. So I had this thing for Personality Max website. We did this at the beginning. But I want to see what your reflections are at the end. Okay, I'm not going to share all that, but good job getting that in there first. And then let me go back to the module and see if I put the notes in there. Looks like I bumped right over the notes. Yeah, let's see if I can find it. Add it right now. Assignment. This is how you know I'm doing this one. Feedback notes, chapter 11. There we go. And then I have to move it up. I'm so glad we did this together. Good. So notes. And it says me, and it had the right date. It just wasn't in there. Boom. Boom. There we go. Cool. So that was chapters or modules 10 and 11. That's a lot. But we take one extra week for module 12. I mean, like, we're going to do this. I'm sorry, we're going to do social emotional on its own, but I let that out early. And then we're going to double up 13 and 14 again. And the very last week, we'll just have the one. I think that helps. So we don't get totally crammed down in the last week. But again, we had to double up a few, but I figured in adolescence, you guys kind of got this. As we look forward to it, physical development as puberty, 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 right? That's a lot in there. Same thing with cognition, how our brain grows with having all the hormonal shifts. And then the last chapter is all about social emotional. So our emotions and adolescence, it's a lot. But again, since you guys are connecting to the middle childhood piece, the adolescence piece is going to be a lot more familiar. I don't want to say easier, but just as a sneak peek, 15 is a beast because there's a lot. And I'm glad we're doing that one alone because it's almost like adolescence emotions, but also like what happens after you turn 18. We call that provisional adulthood or emerging adulthood. So 15 is a big one. So get your stuff in as soon as you can, keep caught up so you're not behind as we go into finals week. So any comments, questions, concerns on 10 and 11?
You put the discussion board of chapter 11 next week, right?
Let me double check that right now. Let me shut off the recording first.